It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Claude Newbury, whom I can describe as a very good friend. I particularly like listening to him. As the psalmist says, listening to him is like the oil that ran down the beard of Aaron, even to the hem of his garments. He's such a smooth talker. But what he says is Catholic truth, and it's always very, very informative, and it's so well put together. Together with his wife, Glenys, Dr. Claude Newbury has devoted 35 years to propagating and defending the culture of life. They have together given more than 6,000 talks. I told you he was a smooth talker. Claude founded the Catholic Doctors Guild of Southern Africa and served as national president of Pro-Life South Africa for 25 years and Human Life International South Africa for 15. In 1992, Father Paul Marx, in an HLI Award, designated them the couple who had done the most to defend human life around the world. And so, with that introduction, I'd like to present to you Dr. Claude Newbury.
I don't need this Joe to talk about. I always say it's a tremendous mistake to applaud a speaker before you've heard what he's got to say. So maybe at the end, I hope you like what I've got to say. My talk is Mortal Combat Against the Culture of Death. I dedicate this talk to Our Lady of Guadalupe, patroness of the pro-life movement, and begin by a prayer, with a prayer. O Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, and our most gentle Queen and Mother, look down in mercy upon England, thy dowry, and upon us who greatly hope and trust in thee. This talk deals with our obligation to engage the culture of death in mortal combat, an evil culture clearly defined by Pope John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae, a culture which is now dominant and has supplanted the previous Christian culture. We are compelled to oppose it. In Evangelium Vitae, Blessed Pope John Paul II says, everyone has an obligation to be at the service of life. Everyone. No exceptions. I shall often mention the culture of death. Well, what is culture? Culture may be defined as the ideas, beliefs, and values prevalent in a society. And those ideas, beliefs, and values, how they affect that society. The sum of that then constitutes the culture of that society. I shall tell you of disturbing and bewildering things and speak in direct and sometimes critical language, not attempting to hide or blunt the horror or the evil of the prevalent culture of death. What I say will be well known to most of you who have seen long and meritorious action in the pro-life movement. Furthermore, I must emphasize that I present this talk as my own particular view. It is not necessarily the view of Family Life International. So if there is any criticism of what I say, please direct it to me. I pray that it will serve as a reality check and a rallying cry. I intended to remind us of what is at stake, who and what we are fighting against, and to increase our determination and courage. For those who perhaps have not yet been deeply involved, I pray that this talk will encourage you to use all your talents and strength in the pro-life movement. In his book, Abortion, the Silent Holocaust, Father John Powell says, "The God who comes to comfort the afflicted also comes to afflict the comfortable." And I think in our society we have become too comfortable. We have developed a sort of coexistence with the culture of death. Sometimes in the brutal culture war that we are now fighting, we may be lulled into a lack of urgency and commitment. Should this be the case, I hope that this talk will help to dispel such lethargy. Many are tempted to adopt an attitude of indifference to this dire situation and to try to isolate themselves from it, saying something like, "Well, if society is going to hell in a suitcase, I'll keep my own nose clean. I'll do my own thing. I'll look after my own family." Or, worse still, we come like lotus eaters, narcotized by this culture, and letting our lives and opportunities slip by, forgetting, if we dare, that God vomits the lukewarm from his mouth. We simply cannot sit back and watch the world stumble to perdition. We are, in fact, our brother's keepers. At my final judgment, I fear to hear Jesus say to me, "When I was being aborted, you did not defend me. When I was being denied, you did not speak for me." Rather, I hope to hear, children, now safe in the arms of Jesus, cry out, "Lord, be merciful to him, a sinner. Do not condemn him to everlasting punishment. He tried to defend life." This talk is intended to nurture, stimulate, edify, exhort, and encourage us, and revive in us a state of consciousness in dark and stark contrast to the culture of death, which surrounds us and is relentlessly corrupting, strangling, and destroying us. In reality, all by baptism and confirmation are called to bear prophetic witness to society. So, asking you to kindly keep these remarks in mind, I now proceed, praying as I do that what you are about to hear, irrespective of my imperfect thoughts and words, are things that the Holy Spirit has moved me to say. I come now to the field of battle, to mortal combat with the culture of death. It is imperative to remember that in this struggle to defend human life, we are not simply opposing evil people or vile ideologies or wicked organizations, but we are locked in mortal combat with the powers of darkness, with the evil one and his demonic legions. If we think that we can, by means of our own strength, oppose such abysmal evil, we will be in the most appallingly hopeless and dangerous situation. When we move against the prime enemy of God, remember that of ourselves we can do nothing. Without God's protection, Satan will sift us like chaff. However, when we act as instruments of God and place ourselves under his protection, subjecting ourselves without reservation to his command, then we shall most surely be enabled to do good. In our work, we also place ourselves under the protection of the most holy Mother of God, whose heel shall crush the head of the serpent. And of Saint Joseph, guardian of the Holy Church, guardian of the Holy Family, and terror of demons. Let us consider the stark reality of our situation. In any battle, it is essential to survey the battleground, to study and to gather information about the plans and tactics of the enemy, and the strength and disposition of his forces, to understand how the enemy thinks and operates, to discover his strategic objectives and to anticipate these moves. How his propaganda machine works, and where he has planted traitors and secret agents among our own forces, and what human weaknesses and cowardice he exploits to gain advantage in his quest to destroy human life. Clearly, this subject is too large to be covered in 60 minutes, but perhaps this talk will serve to encourage you to develop and amplify what I say. Later on, I shall speak to your rational side, to the rational side of our intellects. But for now, for this moment, for the next few minutes, I ask you to withdraw with me into the land of your imagination, to enter the land of dreams and of nightmares. Imagine that you have fallen asleep, and during the course of an almost unending and terrifying night, you are tormented by frightful nightmares. In these horrifying dreams, you live in a country where every day more than 600 very young children are murdered in the most deliberate and brutal manner. They are calmly and skillfully executed by trained medical assassins in hospitals, clinics, consulting rooms, and even in domestic residences. Drugs and devices designed to kill unborn children are widely available. Although taxes are used to pay for most of these abortions, some assassins work in private clinics where they are paid directly by the parents of the children they kill. Sometimes medical insurance schemes are used to subsidize these killings. This slaughter is at the request of the mothers of these children. Many reasons are given for that, such as that these children are inconvenient, they are burdensome, they could harm the physical and mental health of the mothers, they are surplus to the needs of their parents or the country, they would ruin the lives or careers or even the glamorous bodies of their mothers, they are imperfectly formed, the mental health of the mother would suffer in having them. These children were conceived in acts of rape or incest or of unlawful carnal knowledge. But mostly they are killed because they are contraceptive failures. They are killed with almost unimaginable brutality by means of specially designed knives, instruments, devices, drugs, and poisons. In this nightmare, you feel the shocking pain of abortion. In your nostrils is the nauseating smell of death. You hear the silent screams of agony as these children are murdered. In your dream, your guardian angel allows you to see the tears that Jesus, his most holy mother, and the guardian angels of these aborted babies shed. Those killing these children do so antiseptically. Often anesthetics and sedatives are used so that the mothers don't feel pain or see the appalling brutality of how their babies are murdered inside them, or so that they won't see the bits and pieces of what only a few moments previously were their babies. Most women who terminate their pregnancies in this way don't seem to care much at the time. In your dream, you hear Mother Teresa of Calcutta saying, "You can scrape a baby out of a mother's womb, but you can never scrape that child out of her heart and soul." To encourage women to have abortions, the doctors and nurses tell them that the babies can't feel any pain. It seems that they think killing is acceptable, provided the killing is painless. You remember that the victims of Auschwitz were killed painlessly. To further soothe any qualms that women may feel, they tell them that in reality they are not babies at all, but are simply fetal matter, clumps of cells, blood clots, products of conception, and embryonic tissue. The usual euphemism given to this particular form of murder is termination of pregnancy, abbreviated to the even blander TOP. And the mothers who kill their babies are simply exercising their reproductive rights. You ask your guardian angel how this is possible in a land where the national flag incorporates the glorious flags of St. George, the defender of chastity, and of St. Andrew, the apostle. In this terrible dream, you find yourself standing inside Auschwitz, and you hear Nazis saying that the human beings that they murder are not human beings in a proper sense. They are human parasites, oxygen wasters, human waste. They are Untermensch. You are so numb with horror at what you see and hear that you cannot move. The air you breathe is foul and tainted with death. The earth you walk on is soaked in innocent blood. Since the time of Auschwitz, the killing of helpless human beings continues unabated. The difference being that then the killers were brought to trial at Nuremberg, while nowadays society condones the silent holocaust of abortion and even honors the killers. You remember that 6 million people were murdered in death camps during the Second World War. But now, in the UK alone, more than 7 million children have been murdered by legal abortion since 1968. Those who kill these babies dismiss all evidence, such as the silent scream and the eclipse of reason, that show babies trying to escape from the abortionist's instrument. Abortionists refuse to show women coming to them the scans of their babies or let them hear the baby's heartbeat, because when most women see their babies or hear their hearts, they refuse abortion. In this dream you cry out, "Stop, stop! In the name of God, stop!" The murderers take no notice of you. Often when you try to confront them and their supporters, they tell you that you are being emotive, that you must be some kind of religious nut, or, even worse, a fanatical or fundamental Catholic. These abortions are authorized by the government, which owns and subsidizes most of these human abattoirs, and it collects statistics about the numbers of abortions. The government also supervises these abortories to ensure that they conform to most modern standards of practice, and they run in antiseptic, safe, and cost-efficient ways. Clearly, safe legal abortions are always fatal for the baby. They are specifically designed to kill babies. And for the babies killed, it is irrelevant whether they were killed in state hospitals or in the back streets. They are just as dead in either environment. So the safety aspect only applies to the mother, not to the baby. In your nightmare, you see doctors trying to ensure that infertile women become pregnant by in vitro fertilization. In the test tube baby industry, if instead of the one desired child, there might happen to be twins or triplets or even more, then these very same doctors will stab and kill each one of the surplus babies in the womb. They put needles guided by ultrasound into the hearts of these little ones. They choose at random which ones they're going to kill, and then they inject potassium usually. This process they blandly call fetal reduction. A short while later, these very same doctors who were busy trying to get women pregnant by test tube baby programs will move away to another operating theatre, where they will happily kill children by abortion. While most of these terminations are paid for by public taxes, there are also organizations in this benighted land who are classified as charities. The Brooke Foundation, Marie Stopes, British Pregnancy Advisory Services, Well Women Clinics, Planned Parenthood, who solicit funds from the public and from the state to carry out abortions which they deem to be a public service, and in accordance with the right of the mothers of these unplanned babies to kill them. You now ask, how is it possible that people allow these evil organizations to call themselves charities? Surely, you say, charity means love, compassion. Essentially, it means the love of God, and because of Him, love of your neighbor. In contrast, these vile organizations are key agents of the culture of death. You protest at the corruption of language used to destroy morality and life. The killers call an unborn child a fetus because they wish to disguise its humanity. Would anyone you know ask a pregnant woman if her fetus is moving yet? Or, when is your fetus due? This language is used to facilitate abortions. They promote reproductive rights when they want abortion. They speak of family planning when they destroy families and eradicate family members. They speak of women's rights but ignore unborn women. They speak of death with dignity when they kill aged, severely handicapped, vulnerable or terminally ill people by active and passive euthanasia. Essentially, they bring about this death with dignity by dehydration and starvation. You remember that the Lord of Life told us that the devil is the father of lies and a murderer from the beginning. You see the pitiful remains of aborted children being disposed of by incineration and garbage disposal grinders, apart from those bits that might be useful. The useful parts are harvested. Some parts are used for scientific purposes, some to produce vaccines, some to replace organs and parts of other individuals whose lives are considered to be more valuable than those who are cannibalized in this way. Some embryos or fetuses are kept in cold storage as spare parts for siblings who might later need to cannibalize them. Apart from killing unborn children by surgical means, the society you find yourself in during that long and life-changing nightmare also relies on human pesticides as family planning drugs and devices. About 95% of the women use abortifacient birth control drugs and devices, such as the pill and the IUD, the morning after pill, and RU486, the famous French do-it-yourself abortion pill. All these methods of family planning destroy very young human beings just a few days after their lives begin at conception. Generally, these things are used to allow unlimited sexual activity without the risk of pregnancy. Children conceived while their parents use these methods are viewed as contraceptive failures, and this kind of failure is corrected by abortion. You see medical scientists experimenting on tiny human beings, cloning them and keeping them in scientific concentration camps, not surrounded by barbed wire and machine guns, but surrounded by liquid nitrogen. The doctors and scientists engaged in this work, just like the unspeakable Dr. Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz, experiment on helpless, captive, innocent human beings. Your mind goes back to those Nazi experiments on the immersion of captives in freezing water, and you think of human embryos immersed in the abysmal cold of liquid nitrogen. This unending night of horror continues. You see surplus embryos destroyed by incineration or being washed down the laboratory sinks. You see doctors searching for handicapped babies in the womb so that such imperfect children can be killed before birth. A kind of search and kill operation, not now taking place in Pakistan to find and kill deadly enemies like Bin Laden, but search and kill operations to find and kill helpless, innocent, handicapped children in the womb. This killing is thought of as preventative medicine. The womb that once was the safest of all places for a human being to be is now the most dangerous place in the whole world. There are at least 70 million surgical abortions performed each year around the world. Remember, by the way, that the whole loss of life in the Second World War was 60 million. But in one single year, the medical profession throughout the world, I'm a doctor, are more terrible, kill more human beings than all the armies of the Second World War. Dear Hippocrates, dear St. Luke, dear and glorious physician, that is, those killings are apart from those being aborted very early in their lives by family planning drugs and devices. You see handicapped newborn babies who have somehow escaped detection and death in the womb being killed by dehydration and starvation after birth in nurseries, an appalling process astonishingly known as the benign neglect of handicapped newborns. I have just such a book, published by Oxford Press. You remember that amongst the few words Jesus spoke while he was dying on the cross was, "I thirst." So terrible was that thirst that the unimaginable agony of the nails, the thorns, and the previous fearful scourgings were less than that awful thirst. Naturally, he was also thirsting for our souls. In your nightmare, you seem helpless to stop this wholesale murder. The media generally ignore objections to it, or infinitely worse, they regularly support and promote this kind of slaughter. In your anguish, you ask your friends and neighbors why they cannot see what is happening, and ask why they don't oppose it. The media will not expose the evils of birth control programs, exported to faraway lands where the people are not yet conditioned to eradicating children. Like, for example, the countries in my native Africa. Furthermore, your country, this country, sees this exportation of population control, depraved sexuality and abortion as aid to the third world and as overseas development programs. In your dream, you say that if you can just run to your parish church, your fellow Catholics will listen to you when you tell them about what is going on. Surely they will share your anguish when they discover the truth and will unhesitatingly join you in a crusade to stop this brutal mass murder of children and of morality. When you tell them, your priest and your bishop, of this terrible soul-destroying wholesale slaughter, most of them only look at you with dull and unresponsive faces and turn away from you. They don't want to get involved. They think that you are being wildly emotive, getting things horribly out of perspective. Worse still, some Catholics will claim that abortion is a woman's choice and ask what right you have to impose your narrow moralistic views on women who want abortions. You are accused of extreme chauvinism. Oh, you oppose abortion because you just don't have a womb, do you? That's been hurled at me on many occasions. Some argue that the world can't support any more babies, and surely it is better to kill them rather than to let them live in misery. It's better to kill them rather than let them live in misery. Why should they live in misery? Doesn't the world have enough resources for them? There are mountains of food at present. Some ask what you are doing to stop global warming. Move the argument away from the killing of the unborn, famous diversionary tactic. Oh, what are you doing to stop global warming? You're talking about abortion. They challenge you to care for all unwanted children and all women with unplanned pregnancies. They ask you what you're doing about homelessness, hunger, poverty, nuclear weapons, and the war in Afghanistan. This is the seamless garment approach, first brought about by Cardinal Bernardin in Chicago. An approach which blunted the whole of the pro-life movement. It goes along these lines, that you can't act and talk against abortion until you've done all these other things. It's a seamless garment, as if it's not the primary task to save unborn children in this way. You say, those killed by abortion and birth control drugs and devices were very much alive until they were killed by these means. Everybody once was a tiny human embryo. Jesus, the creator of the universe, was once a tiny embryo in his Holy Mother's womb. When John the Baptist, then also an unborn child, leaped for joy in his presence. You tell them that the eternal Lord of creation loves each and every one so much that he died to save us from sin and death. He who holds the universe in the palm of his hand has created us in his own image and likeness, and will bless abundantly those who honor him by keeping his commandments. He will not be outdone in generosity, and will richly reward us on the day of judgment. You say, all the things that you challenge me to do in order to stop abortion and to help pregnant women, I am more than willing to do. But I can't do it all on my own and need your help. At that point, most of them turn away, and some of them pick up stones. Strangely, unmoved by the plight of unborn children, most Catholics willingly pray for the hungry, the oppressed, victims of floods, hurricanes, earthquakes and tsunamis, for the ending of wars in faraway lands, for violence to stop, for victims of sexual and other abuse, for discrimination against people of other races to stop, for those killed on the motorways, and for almost everything else. But never a prayer is said for children murdered by surgical abortion, or by the IUD, the pill, or the morning after pill, or for the mothers and fathers of these aborted babies. You complain to Jesus. Lord, you say, my bishop and my parish priest prioritize love, justice, and peace, but they will not mention the slaughter of children by abortion, and they never speak about the soul-destroying contraception. They refuse to ask you to stop this killing. Lord, my bishop and priest will not join protests about this, and I really fail to understand their apathy. Most of your fellow Catholics don't see tiny unborn children as their neighbors, who in abortion are victims of the ultimate form of violence and child abuse. They refuse to acknowledge that the pill and other contraceptive devices kill very young human beings. They can't understand that these evils turn the womb into a tomb and turn women into walking graveyards. In your appalling nightmare, you ask your neighbors, why won't you say anything about this mind-numbing evil? For after all, the silent Holocaust is the greatest loss of human life in all history. By far the greatest of all human tragedies. The deaths of the Second World War are small in comparison. In bewilderment, like Father John Paul, you ask, why can't you see what I see? Why can't you hear what I hear? You employ your fellow Catholics and say, for the sake of the sacredness of human life and your own immortal souls, do not pass by with averted eyes on the other side of the road to Jericho. Possibly once a year your pastor might allow a pro-life collection. The apathy of most of your fellow Catholics and their failure to help stop the slaughter is the very worst part of your nightmare. You recall the words of Edmund Burke when he said that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. You begin to understand a little of how Jesus felt. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. You employ Jesus, the Lord of life. Lord, that I might see. Lord, that I might hear. Lord, you can do all things. As you raised Lazarus from the dead, so also we employ you to raise us from this spiritual death. In this seemingly unending nightmare, you feel that you are going to die of a broken heart, to die of terror and of profound mind-shattering revulsion and anguish. But some are willing to learn the truth and are ready to oppose the culture of death. These noble souls profoundly console and assist you in what they also see as their own struggle. Suddenly, you wake up. You're weak with terror. Your heart is thumping. Your vision blurred with tears. Your palms are sweaty. Your hands and knees tremble. In your nostrils, you still seem to smell the blood of the aborted babies and the antiseptic smell of the abortories. You still seem to see the smoking chimneys of the incinerators used to burn the aborted children. You can still hear their silent screams and the sounds of the garbage grinding waste disposal units which dispose of them. You remember their frantic and hopeless efforts to escape the instruments held by the slaughtermen. You are now fully awake, and you thank God and your guardian angel that you have finally woken from that long, most terrible night, a truly dark night of the soul. You know that you simply had to wake yourself, because the horror of it all was so unbearable that, had it continued for very much longer, you feared for your life and for your sanity. Again, you thank God and His Most Holy Mother that you are still alive. But then you realize that what you experienced during the night is as real as the blessed morning sunlight streaming in at your window. It was not simply a terrifying dream. You live in such a vile society, and you are surrounded by the realities that you saw during that fearful night. Yet looking out of your window, it all seems so very normal. But the harsh truth is that just beneath the thin veneer lies the reality of what happens. If you look about you, you will see it everywhere. Every part of your nightmare is true. You reside in one of the principal strongholds of the culture of death. This very day, in England's green and pleasant land, once known as Our Lady's Dowry, 600 babies will brutally and mercilessly be killed by legal abortion. The Abortion Act was passed in 1967 and signed into law by Queen Elizabeth, who bears the title of Defender of the Faith. It was introduced and piloted through Parliament by David Steele. Subsequently, the Queen raised him to the peerage, and he is now Lord Steele of Akewood. He became first presiding President of the Scottish Parliament and was appointed Lord High Commissioner to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. In 2004, the Queen made him a Knight of the Order of the Thistle, the highest order in Scotland. Since the passage of that law, approximately 7 million children have been aborted. London is a key stronghold of the culture of death. In it lie the headquarters of International Planned Parenthood Federation, the world's largest agent of abortifacient birth control and sexual depravity. It works to undermine and then overthrow the very last vestige of resistance to abortion and sexual morality all over the world. Also in London are the headquarters of the Marie Stopes organisation, which promotes and provides abortion and sexual permissiveness in many countries. In the third world, it advertises its abortion services on garbage bins. The Brooke Advisory, another agent of sexual immorality, abortifacients and abortion, is also based in London. The British Overseas Development Corporation funds population control and abortion in many countries. In South Africa, it funded a local agent of Planned Parenthood which performed illegal abortions many years before the introduction of Nelson Mandela's brutal Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act. The UK is in the forefront of fetal experimentation, test tube baby programs, human cloning, the creation of human-animal chimeras, genetic engineering, euthanasia and sex education. The state, although it has anti-rape laws, condones and supports the sexual abuse of underage girls by giving them drugs and devices so that they can take part in safe sexual intercourse without becoming pregnant. Furthermore, when their birth control fails, the state arranges for these juvenile mothers to be aborted without ever even having to inform their parents. In doing this, they are in reality aiding and abetting statutory rape. While the media unhesitatingly publishes cases of child abuse by Catholic priests, yet the sexual abuse of other children is simply condoned and facilitated by giving out birth control drugs, devices and abortions to minors and by prurient sex education. Our schizophrenic society sees violence as criminal, yet unhesitatingly supports the violence of abortion. Throughout the developed world, the situation is much the same. President Obama is radically pro-abortion, always voting for it, even for partial birth abortion when the baby is killed in the very process of being born. He supports fetal experimentation and, despite the financial crisis, fully funds Planned Parenthood. Yet he was honoured by Notre Dame, the famous Catholic university. Ted Kennedy, another pro-abortionist, received a full Catholic funeral attended by the Archbishop of Boston. Other notorious pro-abortion politicians, such as Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Biden, who claim to be Catholics, are permitted to receive Holy Communion. Truly, as Pope Paul VI said, from some fissure the smoke of Satan has entered the temple of God. Nowadays, Catholic women use birth control drugs and devices and even have abortions at the same rate as non-Catholics. Some studies in the USA indicate that Catholic women seem to have surgical abortions with even greater frequency than non-Catholics. Most of the diminishing numbers of Catholics who still go to church and have qualms about the birth control are regularly told by the clergy to follow their own consciences in these matters, without the clergy forming and informing those consciences. Traitorous theologians, bishops and archbishops have denied the validity of the Church's consistent teaching that contraception is intrinsically evil. Publications contradicting Catholic teaching and the authority of Pope Pius XI in Casti Connubii, Pope Paul VI in Humanae Vitae, and Pope John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae are on sale after Sunday Mass. Meanwhile, the laity rarely hear about the valid use of natural fertility regulation when used by married couples in very special circumstances. In fact, I have heard priests ridicule Humanae Vitae as Paul's epistle to the Fallopians, and NFP as Vatican Roulette. The scandal of journals like the Tablet supporting and promoting the denial of the authority of Humanae Vitae, even now, some 43 years after its publication, especially when all the prophecies made by Pope Paul VI have come about, is an ongoing abomination. Faithful Catholics constantly ask why the leaders of the Church took no action to punish traitors to the faith, including those who condone the killing of the unborn by the use of abortifacient birth control drugs. drugs whose abortifacient actions their own manufacturers admit, but which dissident theologians and hierarchy continue to ignore. Abortions caused by birth control drugs outnumber surgical abortions by 10 to 1. In this most terrible war against life, we again and again ask, why are these traitors not excommunicated and banished to the abysmal darkness outside the church? When a surgeon discovers a malignant tumor, he cuts it out in an attempt to save the life of the patient. If the cancer is in the eye, he removes the eye. On the hand or on the leg, he may have to amputate the limb. Yet malignant tumors are more often than not totally undisturbed inside the body of the church, even when they reside in chancelleries, seminaries, and universities. Jesus says, if your eye offends you, pluck it out, lest it destroy your whole body. Orthodox Catholics and the pro-life community in particular, loyal foot soldiers of the church militant, are profoundly scandalized and estranged from many of their bishops and priests by this kind of betrayal and sabotage. Abortion is now normal in the formerly Catholic countries of Italy, Austria, Spain, France, Portugal and Belgium. The only places in Europe where abortion is still forbidden are Ireland and Malta. As reported in the Catholic Herald on the 21st of January this year, Tory MP Nadine Dorries, who was trying to reduce the upper limit for abortions to 20 weeks from the previous 24 weeks, told the Catholic Herald that she feels badly let down by church leaders, both Anglican and Catholic, in her fight to reform Britain's abortion law. She said, I need religious support. It is our core support. I need the churches being more involved, and the churches have been pathetic during the abortion debate, pathetic in their support for what I was trying to do. The Church of England was the worst, and the only person in the Catholic Church who made any comment was Cardinal O'Brien. Everybody was silent because the churches were weak and cowardly in their position. That's her quotation. Member of Parliament trying to slow down this abortion holocaust in some way. To digress for a moment, some of you might have seen it. Yesterday, Dr. Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, criticized the killing of the terrorist bin Laden, saying that the killing of an unarmed man is always going to leave a very uncomfortable feeling. However, he maintains a deafening silence when it comes to the murder by abortion of 600 totally innocent, helpless babies every day right in his own backyard. The Catholic Herald goes on to say, the hierarchy was also tragically ineffective in campaigning against the 1967 Abortion Act. Lay Catholics fought bravely against the law, but the bishops woke up to it late and issued only a few weak statements. As somebody once said, silence is not golden, it is yellow. To fear to tell the truth, to fear to speak out in defense of the unborn, in defense of morality, in defense of Christian civilization, in defense of the teaching of Jesus, who, in defense of the Catholic faith, is utter cowardice. Those bishops and priests who fail to speak up and to defend innocent, helpless human life are unworthy of their office. They commit treason against God, and they betray the church militant. In the army, traitors and cowards are court-martialed, cashiered, stripped of their rank, imprisoned, and even, in the past, like in the First World War, executed for cowardice in the face of the enemy, and are never buried in military cemeteries. In Proverbs, God says, "If you remain indifferent in time of adversity, your strength will depart from you. Rescue those who are being dragged to death, and from those tottering to execution, withdraw not." Why has the pro-life movement not been able to change the law? The answer is that we have had so little support from our fellow Catholics, who, apart from one or two noble exceptions amongst the bishops, are impassive. Even worse, some bishops criticize and undermine pro-life activists and leaders. Tragically, the majority of the bishop and clergy have shown apathy for the pro-life cause, other than occasionally paying lip service to it. Why will bishops, once again with noble exceptions, not teach their flocks about the intrinsic evil of contraception and the countless very early abortions brought about by these so-called contraceptives? Naturally, it is essential to differentiate between those methods of birth control which are contraceptive, such as the condom, the diaphragm, and spermicidal agents, and those which, while sometimes acting as contraceptives, also are abortives. When society accepts and normalizes abortion, what else is such a society not capable of? If the clergy cannot speak and act against unborn children, then what can they possibly say about fraud, or sexual immorality, or for that matter about any other moral ill whatsoever? In such silence and such inaction, they lose all moral authority. What good is the right to worship, the right to freedom of religion, to freedom of speech, the right to marry and to bear children, the right to vote, to shelter, to food and water, to medical care, to education, and so on, if the fundamental right to life is denied by abortion? What good are all of these human rights to the children mercilessly murdered in the womb? This fight needs courage and faith, and clearly in this, the majority of the Catholic laity and clergy are lacking. Many bishops and priests seem to fear that they might suffer injuries, insults, and be wounded on behalf of Christ, although most prefer rather to preach and write pastorals and politically correct statements on non-controversial issues. However, the Church has always taught about sins of omission. In the Confitia, we beg God's forgiveness for those things we have done and for those things we have failed to do. And when the failure to act concerns a very grave matter, such as the murder of innocent children, then these who fail to speak and teach and act against such diabolical evil share in the guilt. When the Church is ever busy in trying to implement the corporal works of mercy, the spiritual works of mercy are generally ignored. Works of mercy such as to instruct the ignorant, to counsel the doubtful, and to admonish sinners. Sadly, the overwhelming majority of bishops will not speak about these crucial issues, even in the sheltered and protected environments of their own churches and cathedrals, to their own tame flocks. I've worked as a doctor in the UK for 10 years and have attended Holy Mass at least once a week. But I've never heard a sermon on abortion, contraception, or sexual immorality outside of pro-life meetings such as this. As far as so many Catholics are concerned, the pro-life battle goes by default. The great Saint Athanasius, Patriarch Archbishop of Alexandria, stood virtually alone against the Arian heresy, which had infested the church in his time. Heretical bishops had even put a price on his head. They hired assassins to kill him. He went into hiding on many occasions, hidden by the very few bishops, priests and laity who loved him. Saint Athanasius illustrated his appraisal of the great majority of the bishops of that time when he said, "The floor of hell is paved with the skulls of bishops." In 1973, Bishop Rudolf Graeber of Regensburg published Athanasius and the Church of Our Time, an astonishing book which explained much of what is happening in the church today. Bishop Graeber pleads for bishops of the courage and caliber of Saint Athanasius. The saintly Dietrich von Hildebrand, whom Pope Pius XII considered to be the greatest theologian of the 20th century, revealed and explained the present state of the church in two of his books, The Trojan Horse in the City of God and The Devastated Vineyard. So what kind of bishops are needed to oppose the culture of death? Bishop Austin Vaughan of New York marvelously provides us with just such an example. Bishop Vaughan was arrested and jailed on 10 occasions for participating in Operation Rescue's non-violent protest aimed at shutting down abortion clinics, particularly by forming a human barrier at the entrances to abortories. Even in a wheelchair, after suffering many strokes, Bishop Vaughan continued to take part in these life-saving blockades. Speaking at an Operation Rescue rally, Bishop Vaughan explained that on his episcopal ring were the images of Jesus, St. Peter and St. Paul, and that all three were arrested, put in jail and killed for their witness to the truth. Today the church desperately needs holy bishops and priests, true shepherds who are willing to defend the faith, their flocks and the lives of all children, born and unborn, if need be even with their own lives, men who unhesitatingly bear witness to the truth. But when society forgets or denies God as ours now does, what then is the basis of truth in that society? Father Paul Marx, who was told by Pope John Paul II that he was doing the most important work on earth, often had to contend with opposition and even persecution from some bishops, abbots and priests. He advised us not to be worried if we don't get help in trying to defend human life. Cowards walk in groups. The brave walk alone, he said. If help arrives and encouragement is afforded you, you must fight bravely. And when encouragement is afforded you, rejoice. Thank God and rejoice. But when you find yourselves alone on the battlefield, you must fight bravely on. After all, you are never alone. You will always have Jesus, Our Lady, and the saints and angels with you. If God is with you, who can be against you? My dear friends, unfortunately, time has run out. I will give this talk for any of you who might want it to Greg Clovis. And Greg, if you contact him through Family Life International, I'm sure he will provide copies of it for you. So I thank you for your kind attention. I wish to close with one very brief statement. We are on the side of God and the Queen of the angels and saints. We are protected under her mantle, and she it is who will finally crush the head of the evil one. This final event will come about in God's good time. But the defeated forces of the enemy are still trying to fight a rearguard action. And they have to be mopped up. And as the church militant, that is our prime task. This is a great time for us to be alive. Opportunities and great graces are superabundant. They are there for the taking. In times of great evil, God always raises up great saints. Christus vincit. Christus regnat. Christus imperat. Christ conquers. Christ reigns. Christ is all. Christ rules. Let us keep that in mind. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention.
Thanks very much. Very good.